The mourners stood in silence, their heads bowed, as the priest began his final prayer. The coffin, polished and solemn, rested at the center of the gathering. Beside it sat Luna, a German shepherd, her body rigid and her eyes locked on the wooden box. She had been Captain James Carter's loyal partner, his shadow, his protector. But today she wasn't by his side. She was at his funeral. Captain Carter had been a decorated army officer, a man of discipline and honor. Luna had been with him through every mission, trained to detect explosives and protect her handler. But today she wasn't working. Today she was grieving, or so everyone thought. As the priest's words filled the air, Luna let out a low, guttural growl. The sound was so unexpected that the mourners froze. Her growl turned into a sharp, insistent bark, cutting through the silence. She pawed at the coffin, her claws scraping against the polished wood. The crowd murmured in confusion. "Luna, stop," whispered Sarah, Captain Carter's sister, tugging gently at the dog's collar. But Luna wouldn't stop. She barked again, louder this time, her body tense and her eyes wild. It wasn't the bark of a grieving dog. It was the bark of a dog trying to warn them, trying to tell them something was wrong. The priest paused, unsure of how to proceed. Sarah knelt beside Luna, her voice trembling. "What is it, girl? What's wrong?" Luna's barks grew more frantic. She lunged at the coffin, her nose pressing against the seam where the lid met the base. The mourners exchanged uneasy glances. Something about the dog's behavior felt off. It wasn't just grief. It was something deeper, something urgent. Finally, one of the pallbearers, a fellow soldier who had served with Captain Carter, stepped forward. Maybe we should check," he said hesitantly. "Luna's not just any dog. She's trained to sense things we can't." Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding. This was her brother's funeral. It felt wrong to disturb the coffin. But Luna's barks were relentless, almost desperate. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Open it." The pallbearers exchanged uneasy glances but complied. As they pried open the lid, the crowd leaned in, their breaths held. The moment the coffin was fully open, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. Inside the coffin was not Captain James Carter. It was a stranger. The crowd erupted into chaos. Whispers turned into shouts, and the air grew thick with confusion and fear. Sarah stumbled back, her legs trembling, as she stared at the unfamiliar face in the coffin. The man inside was not her brother. He was older, with a beard and a scar running down his cheek, a face she had never seen before. "What is this?" Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "Where's James? Where's my brother?" The pallbearers exchanged horrified glances. One of them, Sergeant Daniels, stepped forward, his face pale. This can't be right. We were told this was Captain Carter. The Army confirmed it." Luna, still barking, circled the coffin, her nose sniffing furiously. She pawed at the edge, her whines growing louder. It was as if she was trying to tell them, "This isn't him. This isn't my owner." Sarah knelt beside Luna, her hands shaking as she stroked the dog's fur. "What do you know, girl? What are you trying to say?" The priest, visibly shaken, closed his Bible and stepped back. "This is highly irregular. We need to contact the authorities immediately." Sergeant Daniels nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the base. There's been a terrible mistake." As the crowd buzzed with speculation, Sarah's mind raced. How could this have happened? Her brother had been declared dead after a mission gone wrong. The Army had recovered his body, or so they said. But if this wasn't James, then where was he? Was he still alive? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Luna, sensing Sarah's distress, pressed her head against her leg, offering what comfort she could. But her eyes never left the coffin. She knew something the humans didn't. She knew this wasn't her owner. Within minutes, the cemetery was swarming with military officials and police. The coffin was sealed and taken away for investigation, leaving the mourners in a state of shock. Sarah stood there numb as the reality of the situation sank in. Her brother's funeral had turned into a nightmare. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Sergeant Daniels. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Sarah. I promise you. If there's been a mistake, We'll find out." Sarah nodded, but her heart was heavy. She looked down at Luna, who was still staring at the spot where the coffin had been. "Luna knows something," she said quietly. She knew it wasn't him. Sergeant Daniels frowned. "Dogs have instincts we don't understand. Maybe she's onto something." Sarah knelt beside Luna again, her voice barely a whisper. "Where is he, girl? Where's James?" Luna let out a soft whine, her eyes filled with something that looked like determination. It was as if she was saying, "I'll find him." The days that followed were a blur for Sarah. The military launched an investigation into the mix-up, but progress was slow. Paperwork was reviewed, records were double-checked, and yet no one could explain how a stranger had ended up in her brother's coffin. The Army insisted that Captain James Carter had been killed in action during a classified mission, but the evidence was now in question. Sarah couldn't sit still. She spent hours pacing her living room, her mind racing with possibilities. Was her brother still alive? Had he been captured? Or was this some cruel twist of fate? The uncertainty was unbearable. But Luna wasn't waiting for answers. The dog had become restless, pacing the house, whining at the door and staring out the window as if searching for something or someone. Her behavior was unusual, even for a grieving dog. It was as if she was on a mission. One evening, as Sarah sat on the couch, lost in thought, Luna suddenly bolted to the door, barking insistently. Sarah jumped up, startled. "What is it, Luna? What do you want?" Luna scratched at the door, her barks growing louder. Sarah hesitated, then grabbed her coat and leash. "All right, girl, let's go." The moment they stepped outside, Luna pulled on the leash, leading Sarah down the street with a sense of purpose. It was dark, and the neighborhood was quiet, but Luna seemed to know exactly where she was going. Sarah followed, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. They walked for what felt like miles, Luna's nose to the ground, her ears twitching at every sound. Finally, they reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building was dilapidated, its windows broken and its doors hanging loosely on their hinges. Luna stopped in front of it, her body tense, her eyes fixed on the entrance. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What is this place, Luna? Why did you bring me here?" Luna let out a low growl, her gaze unwavering. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She pulled out her phone and called Sergeant Daniels. "I need you to meet me at the old warehouse on Elm Street. Luna led me here, and I think she's found something." Within minutes, Sergeant Daniels arrived with a team of soldiers. They entered the warehouse cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust and the floor creaked under their weight. Luna led the way, her nose guiding her through the maze of broken furniture and debris. In the back corner of the warehouse they found a door. It was locked, but the soldiers quickly broke it down. Inside was a small, dimly lit room, and there, lying on a cot, was Captain James Carter. Sarah's heart stopped. He was alive. Sarah's scream echoed through the warehouse. "James!" She rushed to her brother's side, her hands trembling as she touched his face. He was pale, his skin cold, but he was breathing. His eyes fluttered open, weak and disoriented. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Is that you?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded. "Yes, it's me. You're alive. Oh my God, you're alive!" Luna bounded into the room, her tail wagging furiously. She leaped onto the cot, licking James's face and whining with joy. James managed a weak smile, his hand reaching up to stroke her fur. "Hey, girl. I knew you'd find me." Sergeant Daniels and the soldiers stood in stunned silence, their flashlights illuminating the scene. "Captain Carter," Daniels said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We thought you were dead. The Army declared you KIA. How are you here?" James struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. "It's a long story," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was captured during the mission. They kept me here. I don't know how long it's been. I thought I was going to die." Sarah clutched his hand, her heart breaking at the sight of her brother so weak and battered. "We need to get you to a hospital now." The soldiers sprang into action, carefully lifting James onto a stretcher. As they carried him out of the warehouse, Sarah walked beside him, her hand never leaving his. Luna trotted alongside, her eyes never leaving her owner. At the hospital, James was rushed into emergency care. Sarah waited outside the room, pacing the hallway, her mind racing. Luna sat beside her, her head resting on Sarah's lap, offering silent comfort. Hours later, the doctor emerged. "He's stable," he said. "He's malnourished and dehydrated, but he'll recover. He's a fighter." Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Can I see him?" The doctor nodded. "Just for a few minutes, he needs rest." Sarah entered the room, Luna at her heels. James was lying in bed, an IV in his arm, but his eyes were open. He smiled weakly when he saw her. "Hey, sis." Sarah sat beside him, taking his hand. "James, what happened? Who did this to you?" James's expression darkened. "It's complicated. The mission, it wasn't what we thought. There were traitors, people on the inside. They set me up. They wanted me out of the way." Sarah's heart sank. "Traitors? In the army?" James nodded. "I don't know who they are, but they're powerful. They faked my death to cover their tracks. If Luna hadn't found me—" His voice trailed off, and he looked at the dog, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved me, girl." Luna wagged her tail, resting her head on the edge of the bed. Sarah stroked her fur, her mind racing. "We need to tell someone. We need to expose this." James shook his head. "Not yet. If they find out I'm alive, they'll come after me, and you. We need to be careful." Sarah's heart pounded. The danger wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. James's revelation hung heavy in the air. Sarah sat by his hospital bed, her mind racing. Traitors within the army? A fake death to cover up a conspiracy? It sounded like something out of a spy thriller, not her brother's life. But the evidence was undeniable. James was alive, and someone had gone to great lengths to make the world believe otherwise. "We need a plan," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come after you." James nodded weakly. "I know, but we have to be smart about this. If we go public too soon, they'll silence us before we can prove anything." Luna, lying at the foot of the bed, let out a soft whine, as if agreeing. Her ears perked up and she glanced toward the door, her body tense. Sarah followed her gaze, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it, girl?" Before Luna could react, the door creaked open. A nurse stepped in, her face hidden behind a mask. "Just here to check on the patient," she said, her voice muffled. But something felt off. Luna stood up, her fur bristling, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Sarah's instincts kicked in. "Wait, who are you? I don't recognize you." The nurse froze, her eyes narrowing. In one swift motion, she pulled a syringe from her pocket and lunged toward James. Sarah screamed, but Luna was faster. The dog leaped forward, knocking the nurse to the ground. The syringe clattered across the floor. "Help!" Sarah shouted, rushing to James's side. "Someone! Help!" The nurse scrambled to her feet, but Luna was already blocking her path, teeth bared. The commotion drew the attention of hospital staff, who rushed into the room. The nurse tried to flee, but a security guard intercepted her, pinning her to the wall. "What's going on here?" the guard demanded. Sarah pointed to the syringe on the floor. "She tried to hurt my brother. She's not a real nurse." The guard quickly restrained the woman, removing her mask to reveal a face Sarah didn't recognize. The woman glared at them, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she spat. James's face was pale, his breathing shallow. "They're already here," he whispered. "They know I'm alive." Sarah's heart pounded. "We need to get you out of here now." The hospital staff, now on high alert, helped move James to a secure room. Luna stayed close, her eyes darting around as if expecting another attack. Sarah's mind raced. If they weren't safe here, where could they go? Sergeant Daniels arrived shortly after, his face grim. "I just heard what happened. This is worse than we thought. We need to get Captain Carter to a safe house, somewhere they can't find him." Sarah nodded. "But who can we trust? If there are traitors in the army, how do we know who's on our side?" Daniels hesitated. "We'll have to take that risk. But for now, we need to move. I'll arrange transport." As they prepared to leave, Sarah knelt beside Luna, stroking her fur. "You saved him again, girl. I don't know what we'd do without you." Luna wagged her tail, her eyes filled with determination. She wasn't just a dog. She was a protector, a hero. And Sarah knew that as long as Luna was by their side, they had a fighting chance, but the danger was far from over. Whoever was behind this had resources, power, and a willingness to kill. And they wouldn't stop until James was silenced for good. Under the cover of darkness, James, Sarah, and Luna were transported to a secluded safe house deep in the woods. The location was known only to Sergeant Daniels and a handful of trusted soldiers. It was a small, rustic cabin, surrounded by tall trees and silence. For now, it was their sanctuary. As they settled in, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The attack at the hospital had made it clear. They were being hunted. Luna, ever vigilant, patrolled the perimeter of the cabin, her ears twitching at every sound. James, though weak, was determined to help piece together the puzzle. "We need to figure out who's behind this," James said, sitting at the wooden table with a map spread out in front of him. "If we can find evidence, we can expose them." Sarah nodded, sitting across from him. "But where do we start? You said there were traitors in the army. Do you have any names? Any leads?" James frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't know their names, but I remember bits and pieces from when I was captured. They mentioned a code name, Shadow. Whoever they are, they're high up. They have access to classified information, resources, everything." Sarah's eyes widened. "Shadow? That's not much to go on." "It's all I have," James said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But if we can find out who Shadow is, we can bring them down." Luna, who had been lying by the door, suddenly stood up, her ears perked. She let out a low growl, her gaze fixed on the window. Sarah's heart raced. "What is it, girl?" Before anyone could react, the sound of footsteps crunching on leaves echoed outside. James immediately reached for the gun on the table, his training kicking in. "Get down," he whispered. Sarah crouched behind the table, her heart pounding. Luna positioned herself in front of the door, her body tense, ready to defend her family. The footsteps grew closer, and then there was a knock. 3 sharp raps, followed by 2 softer ones. James relaxed slightly. "It's Daniels. That's the signal." He opened the door to reveal Sergeant Daniels, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, stepping inside. "The people after you, they're not just a few rogue soldiers. This goes all the way to the top. I've been digging, and what I found, it's bad." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Daniels hesitated, then pulled out a file from his bag. "This is classified intel. It's about a covert operation called Project Shadow. It's a black ops program, off the books, no oversight. They've been using it to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. Captain Carter, you were one of their targets." James's face darkened. "Why? What did I do to threaten them?" "You were getting too close to the truth," Daniel said. "You stumbled onto something during your last mission, something they couldn't risk you exposing." Sarah's mind raced. "So what do we do? If they're this powerful, how do we stop them?" Daniel sighed. "We need hard evidence, something that can't be ignored. If we can get our hands on the files from Project Shadow, we can take it to the media, to Congress, anyone who will listen." James nodded. "Then that's what we'll do. But we'll need a plan, and we'll need to move fast." As they huddled around the table, plotting their next move, Luna remained by the door, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. She could sense the danger lurking just beyond the trees. But she wasn't afraid. She had already proven that she would do whatever it took to protect her family. The stakes were higher than ever. They were up against a shadowy enemy with unlimited resources and no mercy. But they had one advantage the enemy didn't count on: Luna. And she wasn't about to let them down. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. Using Sergeant Daniels' connections, they located a secure facility where the Project Shadow files were stored. It was heavily guarded, but James knew the layout. He had trained in similar facilities during his time in the Army. With Luna by their side, they prepared to infiltrate the compound. Under the cover of night, they approached the facility. James, though still weak, moved with the precision of a seasoned soldier. Sarah stayed close, her heart pounding with every step. Luna led the way, her instincts guiding them through the shadows. "This is it," James whispered as they reached the outer fence. "Once we're inside, we need to move fast. Daniels has disabled the security cameras, but we only have a small window." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling. "What about the guards?" "We'll have to avoid them," James said. "But if it comes down to it—" He glanced at Luna, who was already sniffing the air, her ears twitching. "Luna will handle it." They cut through the fence and slipped inside the compound. The facility was eerily quiet. The only sound the hum of distant machinery. Luna led them through the maze of corridors, her nose guiding them toward the server room where the files were stored. But just as they reached the door, an alarm blared. Red lights flashed, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. "They know we're here," Sarah whispered, panic rising in her voice. James cursed under his breath. "We're out of time. Luna, guard the door." Luna positioned herself in front of the entrance, her body tense, her teeth bared. James and Sarah rushed into the server room, frantically searching for the files. "It's here somewhere," James muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Come on, come on!" Outside, Luna faced off against two armed guards. They hesitated, clearly not expecting a dog, but Luna didn't wait. She lunged at the first guard, knocking him to the ground. The second guard raised his weapon, but Luna was too fast. She bit down on his arm, forcing him to drop the gun. Her training kicked in. She wasn't just protecting her family, she was completing the mission. Inside the server room, James finally found what they were looking for. "Got it," he said, pulling a flash drive from the computer. "Let's go." They rushed back to the door where Luna stood victorious, the guards unconscious at her feet. "Good girl," Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. "Let's get out of here." But as they turned to leave, a voice stopped them in their tracks. "Not so fast." A man stepped into the corridor, his face hidden in shadow. He held a gun, aimed directly at James. "You really thought you could expose us?" he sneered. "Project Shadow is bigger than you can imagine, and now you'll never live to tell the truth." Before anyone could react, Luna charged. She leaped at the man, knocking the gun from his hand. James and Sarah seized the moment, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. "It's over," James said, his voice firm. "You're done." With the flash drive in hand and the traitor captured, they made their escape. The files were leaked to the media, exposing the corruption at the highest levels of the military. Project Shadow was shut down, and those responsible were brought to justice. In the weeks that followed, James recovered from his ordeal, his strength returning day by day. Sarah stayed by his side, grateful to have her brother back. And Luna? She was hailed as a hero, her loyalty and bravery celebrated across the country. But for Luna, the greatest reward was simply being with her family. She had done what she was trained to do, protect her handler no matter the cost. And in the end, that was all that mattered.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.